Over the weekend, hungover wine moms got an up-and-close and personal look at AOC when they tuned into Jen Psaki's new MSNBC show. During the interview, AOC was asked about Fox News' recent Dominion settlement. So that's what this answer is in response to: Fox News paying Dominion $787 million. Here's how she answers this.
Very often, I believe that we leave to the courts to solve issues that politics is really supposed to solve, that our legislating is supposed to solve. We have very real issues with what is permissible on air, and we saw that.
Stop right there for a second. Let's just take this back. I want to take this back.
So sad.
We leave to the courts.
She doesn't even look the same. Like, look at the makeup, look at the hair. It's like she is literally morphing into Nancy Pelosi. There's like when people get possessed in the movie and they gradually begin to
that's the Dorian Gray
demon,
right? The age-old, yeah, exactly. All right, here we go.
Very often, I believe that we leave to the courts
to
solve issues that politics is really supposed to solve, that our legislating is supposed to solve. We have very real issues with what is permissible on air, and we saw that.
All right. Speech is not supposed to be solved through politics and legislation. There are certain things that should not be delegated to the courts, but there are certain things that must be delegated to the courts, such as speech. That is why we have a First Amendment. Let me just put this up on the screen. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or the press. What does it say? Congress shall make no law. The Constitution explicitly says speech is not political. We do not legislate matters of speech. You have free speech. Now, there are egregious breaches of other people's liberties that you can violate with your mouth, i.e. threatening to hurt someone, right? And that crosses a very clear line. So yes, you have laws in the books against that.
However,
in a case like this, though, hold on, defamation, the reason why we settle defamation cases in court is because defamation is grayer. So defamation is punishable in court. There's a civil penalty to pay for that. But you have to go to court to prove to a judge that you have been defamed, because we leave that area gray. We leave it gray precisely because it is a matter of speech, and you do not use legislation to govern speech. That's what the First Amendment says in plain English. So this is not only fascistic, but it is just completely ignorant of the most fundamental, I would argue, the single most fundamental constitutional principle there is, in terms of at least the Bill of Rights, right? Is that you have free speech and government does not pass laws governing what you can say, absent an egregious breach of someone else's liberty, threats of violence, right? Fire in a crowded theater, threat to safety. Other than that, yes, we do leave it to the courts. Yes, we do. So you're just plainly wrong. Now, in terms of what's permissible on air, let me let her talk a little more, because then, Russell, I know you have the answer there.
With January 6th, real issues with what is permissible on air, and we saw that with January 6th. And we saw that in the lead up to January 6th, and how we navigate questions, not just of freedom of speech, but also accountability for incitement of violence. This is the line that we have to really explore through law as well. And
do you think media organizations or social media platforms should be accountable for the role for being platforms for incitement?
I believe that when it comes to broadcast television, like Fox News, these are subject to federal law, federal regulation in terms of what's allowed on air and what isn't. And when you look at what Tucker Carlson and some of these other...
Right. Okay. So go ahead.
Okay. So Glenn Greenwald covered this, actually. It's nice we have so many lawyers in our space who can cover these things. Glenn Greenwald, Brianna Joy Gray. All right. So she's wrong on a multitude of levels here. She has no idea what the fuck she's talking about. Federal regulation applies to the public airwaves. That's broadcast television. That's ABC, that's CBS, that's not cable. There is no federal law that applies to cable. This is why you can see boobs on cable, but you do not see it on the public airwaves. That was part of the deal that they made when the government originally licensed out the airwaves to these various private companies. Now, they used to have much stricter quid pro quos in exchange for that privilege, like the equal time doctrine, where if you represented one political point of view on your show, you had to give time to the other. They also had to fulfill a certain amount of socially redeeming content or public service content, and that's what destroyed news. Reagan got rid of that standard, and all of the networks had seen the news as not a driver of revenue, but a fulfillment of that requirement to provide a certain amount of public service programming. So they left the news divisions more or less alone. After Reagan got rid of that, then they started looking at how they could make a profit off news. And that's when you stop having and that's the way it is today, September 17th. That's when you start getting the graphics and the quick editing. And that's when you start getting that, because they start trying to make it entertaining. They start trying to make it entertainment instead of public service. None of that applies to cable. So what she's saying is completely wrong. Now, something else that Glenn got into that I actually didn't know, I think most of us don't. The limitation on the incitement of violence, the bar is actually not as low as we think it is. The bar is actually pretty high. If you say in the abstract, and YouTube gods, I'm not saying this, but if you were to say in the abstract, this thing, if it were to happen, justifies violence, or this thing could lead to violence and that's justifiable, that actually has been found to be protected under the First Amendment. It is only if you say that guy down the street, go get him. Right. If you make an imminent threat of violence, if you incite people to imminently commit,
if you direct people to commit violence,
if you direct people to commit violence in a feasible, not even in an abstract way, not even in a go to the Middle East and
you
sign
have
up.
to say it explicitly.
Right. Right. So she's wrong on every level. Now, I saw Greg Foreman, actually, the black conservative perspective guy. He said something that is very true at this point. It's very true post-Trump. When they say it's a threat to democracy, what they mean is a threat to Democrats.
Of course,
that's how they're defining threats to democracy. Now, what Greg Foreman, as a rule, is not going to get into, or not even as a rule, I've never seen him get into this, and I don't think he would, is, on the other side, the Republicans are trying to rewrite election laws all over the country so that they don't have to stand elections. They have both lost interest in having fair democratic processes. They have different means of trying to make sure that they get a desired outcome. The Republicans, naturally, because of their advantage in state legislatures and governorships, they tend to take that route of trying to draw the congressional districts because they can. Whereas the Democrats have a lot of institutional power. They have a lot of power in media. They have a lot of power in institutions. So the track that they take to try to rig the system is to limit speech, because they have feasible pathways to do that, to, at the very least, make speech culturally forbidden that would stand against them. So what AOC is saying here, I was just having this debate with somebody the other day who was saying, she asked me who I would pick for president. And I said, man, I'm out of that game. I'm completely not interested. She was like, well, but we live in a presidential republic, and the difference is there's one party that wants to take away rights. I said, yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. And I, sent her a link to Plaskett threatening Taibbi with jail. you know, it's again, I'm not saying the Republicans are the defenders of democracy, but neither are the Democrats. It's two different angles on the same anti-democratic tendency. And as people who are in the political commentary space, this is extremely dangerous. It's extremely dangerous that to have a party that is masking a anti-speech drive as a pro-democracy drive. I mean, it's very Orwellian, you know, ignorance is strength.
Yeah, well, she doesn't mask it too much. She didn't waste much time celebrating in public after he was ousted.
Carlson is out at Fox News. Couldn't have happened to a better guy. What I will say, though, is while I'm very glad that the person that was arguably responsible for some of the largest, driving some of the most amounts of death threats and violent threats, not just to my office, but to plenty of people across the country, I also kind of feel like I'm like waiting for the cutscene at the end of a Marvel movie after all the credits have rolled, and then you see like the villain's like hand reemerge out to grip over like the end of a building or something. But deplatforming works, and it is important, and there you go.
Yeah,
Good
there you
things
go.
can
In
happen.
fact, I was you took the words right out of my mouth. I was just going to say, there you go. Deplatforming works. Deplatforming works. So, I mean, I got nothing to say. You heard it there.
Well, not building on what I was saying before, you know, the greatest driver of death threats, first of all, really? I don't think that's really true, that he's the greatest driver of death threats to your office. And also, and we're setting aside ideology here because it seems like you're making an argument of a specific type of speech inciting violence. Do you know that many conservative hosts have to live with private security constantly guarding their families because they're constantly getting death threats? Do you know Ben Shapiro lives like that? Do you know that Matt Walsh lives like that? Do you know even Jeremy at the Quartering has been swatted multiple times and has to have private security? Like, nobody even knows who that guy is.
Right.
And he has to have private security. Was he have 500,000 or something? I mean, and he has to live like that. So if that's the standard you're laying down, we're not talking about whether you like Matt Walsh or not, but if what we're arguing is certain kinds of speech incites violence, and the fact that you got death threats is evidence that they shouldn't be able to speak, well, then we have to pull MSNBC off the air entirely, because we can see tangible results among the kind of people that they target for their accusations of white supremacy and being Nazis.
Yeah, well, certainly. And not only that, you know, the real money line there, the deplatforming works to do what? Again,
Right.
this is a progressive movement that has just given up on winning any actual fights.
Right.
To the point where the only fight you can win now is what? Forcing people you don't like to keep their mouth shut?
Right.
What political victory is that actually? What materially do you actually change by winning that battle? Nothing. You just are what? Less annoyed or less threatened, as you say, by someone else's opinion that you don't like? Like, this is the battlefield now. This is where all of this, you know, quote-unquote progressive energy has led. It's led into, and look, she is the most famous example of this, but she's not the only example of this. Anybody who's, I mean, most of the people who are watching here, you're online people. I'm sure you're on Twitter or you're on Facebook or you're in the Reddit threads, you know. You argue with these people a lot and you understand where they're coming from. A win is shutting you down. A win is shutting you up. That's the only battle they can win at this point, because they're too chicken shit and weak and dumb, quite frankly, many of them, to win any actual fights, any actual struggles out in the world of politics, which is the real world. They forfeited that. They cannot win there. You could not get paid family leave out of Joe Biden with a Democratic Senate and a Democratic House. So these are the battles that they fight now, and they take tremendous pride in winning them because that is how they keep their supporters tuning in and donating and pitching in, right? I mean, that's the game right now. That's it. And so those are the battles she's interested in waging. Those are the battles she's interested in fighting. You know, now that the Democrats have lost the House, she did a press conference about the Green New Deal. But notice when they had the House, where was she on that?
She's not talking about it.
Right,
She's
exactly.
Well, and this is why I talked about this when I went out the day of the Trump indictment. All the intellectual ferment, all the intellectual debate, all the disagreement, it was all on the MAGA side of the park because they're not afraid they're going to get canceled. They're not afraid they're going to lose their job. This is a whole pseudo left movement that is boring as hell because everyone's completely predictable because they have to be. You can't afford to say something that a little outside the box, right? Because you're going to get scolded or maybe canceled, right? You don't know what's going to happen. So all you can do, the only intellectual activity you get is just elaborating on the same nonsense and signaling that you believe in this even more than the next person.
Well, right. And it's all of a piece, right? The reason why the conservatives are more willing to debate is because the conservatives, even when they're not in power, even when they can't change things, they know they can change things. Now, in my opinion, they don't change things for the better. They don't fight the real big battles that have to be fought, which is the power of capital versus the power of labor, right? They're not really interested in that because they're on the right, right? That aside, though, they are actually interested in achieving real things. What did they want? They wanted a wall, right? A wall. That's analog. That's a real thing. That's a thing we're going to build. It's going to be there because of us. If it wasn't for us, it wouldn't be there, right? It's a real thing that they want, that they felt they could get. And to a certain extent under Trump, they did get it. They got pieces of wall. They didn't get the wall he promised, but they got some wall, right? But look, some wall's better than no wall, right? There's like, a wall.
It's like the Great Wall of China.
There's wall in places where if it weren't for us, there'd be no wall, right? Just take that as an example, right? When that is the realm in which you are functioning politically, you have disagreements and you're willing to hash those disagreements out because what those disagreements are in service of things that happen. That happen. Whereas on the left, these disagreements are not in service of things that happen because nothing happens. Because even when you win, you can't make anything happen, right? And so all that you have on the left as an ideal is conformity, right? If you don't have conformity, you have nothing because that's all you do have. It's all you can have. You can't actually win material gains. And when you can't win material gains, it's all about virtue signaling. It's all about herd mentality, and you cannot violate that. Whereas on the right, you can violate that because at the end of the day, maybe we disagree on this or that, but at the end of the day, we're all going to get together and we're going to build a wall. And there's going to be something to show for this. Whereas on the left, you never have any of that, ever.
Well, and ultimately they realize that their cultural positions are deeply unpopular. That's why they are so set against free speech, because they know speech and debate don't favor them. You know, you watch Christopher Rufo, who DeSantis has basically set loose on this college as like a test case of whether you could unwoke a university. And you know, he's an academic. He's a conservative intellectual. And he puts out these 20 to 30 minute pieces that are these think pieces. He just put one out analyzing the why the left has become so focused on gender. And he's trying to have a classical debate, right? He's trying to have this conversation within the parameters of Age of Enlightenment Western rationalism. You know, he's trying to break it down piece by piece. Okay, so the intention of this is this, and this is probably the reality. But actually, what was interesting about it to me is the conclusion he drew was not what you would expect from a conservative, right? Like the conclusion he drew after he had gone through all this was, we have to make space for people who are gender non-conforming. Which that's not what you'd expect, right? That's not the conservative, what you think conservatives would believe, right? Or what a conservative intellectual would come up with. But that's what he came up with. He said we have to make space for this, while at the same time acknowledging biological realities and what comes with that, which seems like a pretty reasonable position to me. Now, if you want to sit down and debate him on that, go ahead. Why don't you? But they won't, because what would you say to that? What would you, if he's just going to go on and be like, men are men, women are women. Okay, you can take that on. But what he argued was what I would say is a classical liberal position. It's like, because you look at people like Rufo, and really they're old school conservatives. They're like pre-crazy conservatives. And that kind of a conservative is a lot closer to a classic liberal than whatever AOC is at this point.
Right. Exactly. All right. Does that wrap our AOC segment?
Well, no, actually, because we have some footage. We've been going out. We've been pounding the pavement. A lot of people have traced back AOC's evolution, her transformation, to the day of the Iron Dome vote. If you remember, AOC did not want to vote for the Iron Dome for Israel. And Nancy Pelosi had a talk with her, and she changed her vote to yes from no, and she was seen crying afterwards. We have a source that was on the floor of Congress with a tape recorder. For the first time, you are going to hear what Nancy Pelosi actually said to AOC that changed her vote.
Take your weapon. Strike me down with all of your hatred, and your journey towards the dark side will be complete.
Ms. Lawson will vote nay on House Resolution 483 amendments. He votes nay.
And so we can see. It's been a mystery. Why was AOC crying? Well, that was the day she turned to the dark side.
Exactly.
And she's never been the same.
Please clap.